Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm Lori Andrews. I'm pleased that you joined our session today. We have quite a few people logged in. You may have noticed that we're using a privacy configuration, so you won't have visibility of your colleagues on the call, nor will you be able to chat with them. But we're still going to use the chat feature, so I'll explain that in just a moment. And to begin with a few housekeeping details, I wanted to share that we are recording today for colleagues who are unable to attend, or in the event that anybody would want to review the recording later and watch it again, perhaps that will be available. Also, we are going to use the chat feature in a way that you'll only be able to chat with me. So when you send it to host, presenter, panelist, it will only come to me. So therefore, I'd love to engage with some questions throughout and get your perceptions, your ideas, and any strategies that you found to be effective, and any comments or questions. So to do that, I will bring in your interaction through the chat very anonymously with a lot of paraphrasing, so there won't be any identifying information, and I hope that that makes everybody feel comfortable. And if for some reason that is not comfortable, I respect that, and feel free to simply type the word private in your chat message, probably at the beginning. That will alert me to keep that between the two of us, and I won't paraphrase it or bring it to the larger group. We will also be pausing toward the latter portion of the session to open up for any additional Q&A, so that recording will be paused and therefore hopefully again increase the comfort level in perhaps submitting a question. You can certainly put a question in along the way. I'm pretty good at seeing the chat in real time and circling back depending on how many participants we have. We have quite a few already, so I'm really looking forward to our time together and such an important topic. And I'm hopeful today that you'll walk away with some key communication strategies that will really support you in listening to each other and feeling heard and understood, and also resolving conflict and working through issues that can arise, especially during this really unprecedented time in our lives and related to how we're working differently and interacting differently. So with that, I thought I would just put up the lay of the land to kind of show you what we're going to cover today. We do want to focus quite a bit on active listening and our nonverbal communication, as well as some ideas for how we can interact more effectively to collaborate, to resolve issues, and to solve problems together, which is so important. And the learning points today include looking at what is considered to be respectful. And we're going to cover some examples of what is not respectful and some best practice ideas for keeping the lines of communication open so that we can work through things together and apply that respectful technique that we all need. So my background is marriage and family therapy, and I come to you with 20 years of experience facilitating on this topic, and also a clinical practice in the past of doing 10 years of community mental health work, as well as private practice. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell, and we shall begin. So how important is respect? Well, it's everything. Are you familiar with the song Aretha Franklin sang, I believe it was in the 60s, titled Respect? So if you can imagine, if you know that song, or perhaps you're Googling the lyrics right now, it begins with RESPECT. So the word is spelled out, and then there's a second line. Does anybody know what that is? If you want to put it in the chat. So I won't sing it for you, but I can hear it in my mind. Perhaps you can if you know the song. RESPECT. Oh, perfect. Somebody's already got it. Thank you for that. I love the interaction in the chat already. Find out what it means to me. Yes. And many of us may have been exposed to something called the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. And a more current updated rule is actually more the platinum rule. Are you familiar with that one? And that is do unto others as they want to be done unto. And what that speaks to me is getting to know people individually, finding out what some of their communication preferences are, and then working to build a bridge so that we both can mutually express ourselves assertively, respectfully, appropriately for, again, feeling heard and understood. That's the ultimate goal. And truly, the respect is so important because we do consider that it impacts our health, and it can cause us to have lowered resistance to illness. So think about our immune system functioning. If we're dealing with a disrespectful environment, that can create a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. It can lead to an imbalanced life, low energy, just feeling as if we are maybe not keeping up. Often there can be fear and mistrust operating in the background if we're not respected. We might be dealing with even dissatisfaction with our jobs or with our roles, and certainly low morale is a big part of it, in terms of how we feel about our work. Depression and sadness can occur, as well as other mental health issues around anxiousness, anxiety, a lot of things. Burnout, certainly in your field, that there's a lot of potential for that. You might be dealing with a lot of compassion fatigue and listening to and supporting other people through their struggles. So that's another possibility. And so it is really important to have a respectful working environment because there are so many other additional stressors. Certainly, if we're under an environment where there's a lot of disrespect, it can affect our self-esteem tremendously. And we might even begin to withdraw or feel isolated. Certainly, we can find that our energy levels are fluctuating, and it can lead to so many more other difficulties. So truly, it does impact the whole entire organization and the well-being of the entire group that we work with, our teams, as well as the wider organization. So when we're dealing with respect and interaction, it does also affect our our work quality. Let's face it, it can affect how present we are, how available we are to work in our environments creatively. It also has an impact on our level of absenteeism, and could even be affecting our level of presenteeism. Have you heard of that before? That involves being in our working spaces, or whether that's remote or hybrid or in person. I know that this is kind of unfolding in real time this fall in terms of returning to working spaces, but we may not be all there. We may not be engaged. We might be physically logged in or physically present, but our mind is certainly not engaged. We might actually notice that it affects our decision-making ability when we're working in a situation where we're not feeling respected. And certainly it can lead to more conflicts and stressful interactions, certainly just reduced productivity. And even in the worst case example or scenario, it could lead to even workplace violence. So that's why it is so extremely vital that we're talking about it today and keeping it on the forefront of the discussion moving forward in terms of how we are working together. So first and foremost, I wanted to have us all think about a reflective question. So before we move on, how would you finish this sentence? And if you want to engage in the chat, if you're available to do that and you're willing, I'd love to bring in your responses. So the question is this. Let's see if you can finish this. I feel most respected when ... You finish the sentence. I feel most respected when. So I'll put that question in the chat, and I'd love to get some interaction to see where people are at and what we can learn about that. And then we'll move on to this slide. My apologies. Here we go. I may not be able to type while you're all typing. So I feel most respected when. I think everybody caught the question. Nice. All right. Well, I'm going to give it just a moment because the fingers have to type, and that takes a little bit of extra time. Thank you so much for engaging. Awesome. I'm getting a lot of chatter in the chat. So I'm going to kind of summarize these and convey it to everybody. When my ideas are heard, Awesome. And another one is when someone listens to everything I'm saying, meaning I'm taking that to mean not being interrupted, that you can get it out completely, you're not cut off, you're not talked over. I think that's, hopefully I'm reading into that correctly. Um, Somebody else is describing about just when I feel respected. And that one can be something that we may have to translate into behavioral terms. We may have to explain, what does respect mean for us? Just like Aretha Franklin, what does it mean to me? So we may have to go a little bit further and actually share an example of what feels respected for us, because we might have really different interpretations of what that means. Someone else is sharing that being acknowledged is absolutely key. Feeling listened to. Another one is feeling included. Thank you for that. Having somebody treat me with courtesy is another great chat coming in. Being able to agree to disagree. Feeling that somebody is professional and they're listening even if they don't actually agree with me. Excellent. When I'm engaged, when someone asks for my opinion, when people engage in discussion on a topic. That's a good one. I like that too. Thank you, Raul. These are really great. When someone asks me for my ideas, when somebody calls me by name or uses my name and addresses me. Another person is saying, when I'm acknowledged by a nod or a smile, someone saying hello. I like that too, especially when we're in person. How about this one? When I receive positive feedback. Excellent, beautiful. And when my opinions are valued, when my work is valued, here's another one, when my thoughts are valued, and when people empathize. I like that a lot. Another person's sharing about processing issues together. That's a really important component. And taking turns, actually, in terms of sharing and communicating. Beautiful. Another one, let's see if I'm getting all of these. I think I've got them all. Wow, this is amazing. Yeah, so you get a sense of this concept of feeling heard, feeling listened to, and oh, here's a good one. When decisions are made and I'm included. I like that a lot. This is really great. When transparency is there, that's another good one. And when the big picture is shared so that it helps unify the team. Another great, great concept. I appreciate you all sharing this. And let's see. Yeah, just the fact that we may not be able to be together all the time can feel, unfortunately, like we're not collaborating as much together. And that has been a really difficult piece of working through what's gone on with the pandemic. And so, just being kept out of decisions is obviously going to feel to a lot of people the opposite of being included. And so, thank you for that. I just wanted to check in. And then we want to talk about, just how we feel about coming to work, and just make a quick comment or remark about defining those components of disrespectful behavior, just to make sure that we're all keeping this fresh, that we're on the same page. And I recognize that in your organization, you have policies, you have your protocols, and so it's always good to keep that in review and just keep it fresh. So that's why I love getting together and keeping this topic alive as we move through life. And so, abuse is any behavior, physical, verbal, nonverbal, that injures, demeans, maligns, or negates the worth of another individual. Harassment is actually described by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC as you might know it, as verbal or physical conduct that denigrates or shows hostility or aversion toward an individual because of his or her race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, and much more, depending on our state and local laws. So that's kind of the short list. And then it can have that purpose of creating an intimidating or hostile environment. It can also have the purpose of unreasonably interfering with an individual's work performance, and it can otherwise adversely affect our employment opportunities. So those are all characteristics of harassment. And then intimidation is defined by Webster's as to make timid, make afraid, daunt or force or deter with threats or violence. And so many of us may have personal experience with any or all of these. And we also want to expand to think about media, social media specifically, and how we could be exposed to any of these things via our devices. And so that's also included. And, you know, if something were to happen outside of the workplace, a bridge can be made back to the fact that, well, we work together and therefore it's going to affect our working relationship. So that can be really detrimental. So it's not just about what happens in person, but also what happens virtually. So that's important to expand upon that. So we are going to move forward just a little bit more and talk about how to own our message. So before we get into this piece, I just want to maybe expand a little more on what is a list of some disrespectful behaviors that really create that atmosphere of, you know, the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. So things like breaking a confidence. If somebody tells us something and then we go and tell other people about it, that would be an example. Anything involving name calling or spreading rumors or gossip. And, you know, that can be actually an interesting one. And I'll be transparent here. Many years ago, when I first finished my master's degree and I began my first job in community mental health, I remember very vividly the first team meeting that I attended at my new workplace. And I happened to have a good colleague who I had known for 2 years in my master's program, who also began his career at the same time. And after the meeting, I recall walking out and stepping into the break room. And okay, granted, I was not saying this in front of other people. It was just the two of us in more of a private space. There was nobody else in the break room. But at this time, as I reflect back, I realized that I was engaging in some gossip. And, you know, I remember trying to sort of rationalize it. And I actually approached him and said, hey, why don't we go into the break room? Let's debrief about the meeting. I used that term. Well, what was I really doing? I was talking about, can you even believe what she said? And oh my goodness, when he did that in the meeting. So I was engaging in that, although I was trying to minimize it in my own mind and call it debriefing, I was still talking about people. And it didn't take me long, probably a few hours later, suddenly it hit me. Oh my goodness, what if that was me? And I recognize that if I'm talking about other people, what are the chances they might be talking about me? Suddenly I was mortified and I realized this is going to be a bad thing for my career if I continue in this pattern. So I quickly made a change and made sure that I didn't do that again. But I actually caught myself doing that, thinking I was so sophisticated and I was debriefing, but really I was talking about people. So there's my transparent story. Also, if you consider not following through with commitments, it's really hard to build trust, and that can breed disrespect if we make promises that we don't keep, or we say something and we do something differently. Then that's not in alignment. That can be a problem. Interrupting people, not listening to them, being dishonest, taking credit for somebody else's work, that happens. Not returning messages or being responsive in a timely manner. That's something that we always need to be, I think, checking out in terms of expectations. I don't know if you found that with a lot of the shift to working more remotely or maybe in a hybrid fashion, that we do have to communicate differently. And so the question becomes, how responsive are we expected to be? So I like to keep that as a current topic of conversation as well. Taking frustrations out on other people, that would be disrespectful. Using profane or obscene language. Of course, many of these things I'm mentioning will go against your policy, as you know. And yelling at somebody, pounding on the table, reprimanding or humiliating somebody in front of others, any kind of harassment issue, even sexual harassment, snide, sarcastic, or inappropriate humor, making a threat or using racial slurs. So that's kind of a little bit more of an expanded list of what those disrespectful behaviors can mean. So let's talk about we're going to also today talk about a couple specific scenarios and maybe how to apply these communication techniques. One in particular being the fact that masks will be worn. I know for sure, my understanding is in the district building, and that, you know, what are we going to do if we encounter students or colleagues or members of the public who are not wearing their masks? How are we going to address that and resolve it in a constructive way, respectfully? And then the other issue is managing the fact that, you know, vaccinations are not necessarily required, meaning that some people might not be vaccinated, and yet that is private medical history. So we're going to kind of talk about those scenarios that are certainly happening in many, many different environments. And then how can we talk about that? How can we work through that? So what I wanted to share right now involves assertive communication technique. And I have researched this in communications literature, and I found a tool many years ago, probably 30 years ago now, that works really beautifully, that I have used consistently to discuss virtually any topic under the sun with anyone, including family members, colleagues, neighbors, leaders, community people, everybody. It works really, really well. So I want to share that with you. And I'm going to actually type it into the chat so that you can, oh, my chat is frozen up. I apologize. I may not be able to put it in the chat. All right. So I'm going to verbalize it. So if you have a pen and a piece of scratch paper, you could grab it right now, or if you have a way to take notes, that would be really helpful. So generally, when we're taught to be assertive or use that style, we may have been coached to say, I feel, I am, I get, which is a very personal way, and it's very assertive and very appropriate. And for many years, I would do that. And lately, since I've discovered this model, what I've used is it's, IT apostrophe S. So think of it is. If you're more formal, you might actually say it is. That's great. It's whatever fits with your style. So you're going to have to shape this. It's going to come to you the way I'm presenting it as more of a template. And then I do have an example that we can use to kind of put some framework to it. So you're going to start with an it's, and then if you're taking notes on your paper, draw a line, and underneath that line, so think of like a blank, you know, it's blank. Underneath that blank, you would write the feeling / experience. So you want to choose a feeling or experience word. For example, challenging, frustrating, difficult, concerning. That's one of the favorite ones that I find myself using quite a bit in my field. Problematic. What do you think of that one? That might just be a great word to start practicing. It's difficult. That's one of my other favorite ones too. So what you're going to do then is move to the second part of your sentence. So what you're doing is kind of crafting a template here. The second part would be when blank happens. Now, the word happens might not actually be a part of your sentence. It's kind of a placeholder to help you understand the sentence. So when blank happens, and underneath that blank, if you're taking notes, you could write issue, and it's important, it's okay to abbreviate too, so whatever you have to do to take your notes. Issue / situation, I often write SIT period, / problem, or PROB / event. So situation or issue, situation, problem, event. Now after that, maybe off to the side in parentheses, you could write the word you / your. Anything involving calling somebody out directly, I tend to avoid. Why? Because it decreases the likelihood that the person might respond even more defensively than perhaps they will already. We don't know for sure. So what I'm trying to do is set you up so that you are building confidence, knowing that this could be perhaps the most assertive, respectful way that is available. I'm always looking for new ways. So if anybody knows something better, please do share. So now what we have is just try to avoid the word you or your. Now you might need to use an I or a we. Sometimes it's hard to just describe the thing that happens neutrally. but sometimes it's not. For example, if a meeting is not starting on time, that's disrespectful to everybody else who marked out the time. So saying it's disrespectful when the meeting starts late is a more neutralized way of not calling somebody out. But most people will figure out, oh, that's because of me. Occasionally, there's a few people in the world, I think you all might know one, who, if you do not call them out specifically, they will not think it's about them when they need to. Okay, but that's very rare. So generally, I will avoid a you or a your, but sometimes you feel like you need to use I or we. That's great. In fact, the we is generally more connecting, more unifying. So you get to kind of think about that, how you would plug in that part of the sentence. And this could be perhaps the hardest part of the template, is figuring out how to say it without calling that person out, because it's very natural to say, it's frustrating when you do such and such, or when you don't do blankety blank, right? That's pretty easy. That rolls off the tongue, but it might increase the defensiveness level. Most people will figure out and assume and kind of discern, oh yeah, that's about me, without it being so personalized. So that's what I like about it. And then going back to the it is or it's, the reason I prefer that to I feel, I am, I get, is there are many times, more often than not, when I don't want to put myself out there personally. And I want to spread it out over more people. And I'll give you an example in just a moment. For in my household, if let's say, I don't know, my husband leaves socks all over the bedroom floor, I can say, it's irritating when socks are left all over the bedroom floor. He knows he did it, right? I don't need to say when you leave socks all over the bedroom floor. And then when I say it's, he can't come back to me and say, well, Lori, that's just you. No, it's every wife on the planet, I'm certain. That's why I said it's more people. So you get my idea. Then the third component is really, for me, what has made all the difference. I call it the game changer. So the third part is because blank. And under that blank, I would have you write 3 words: impact slash outcome slash effect, EFFECT. So impact, outcome, effect. And here is where I'm going to bring it full circle and talk about what happens for me when this thing occurs. I often will take it a step further and do a second impact, outcome, or effect. And I'll do that by doing because blank and blank. I won't go beyond 2 because I think that can be overwhelming, and it might actually come across as I could be even attacking or nitpicking or going on and on and on about the 3rd, the 4th, the 15th reasons why this is impacting. So generally I'll keep it to 2. And the second one is where I'll try to step back. And this is where using a template like this is beneficial, because you can think about, how do I want to frame this up? So just by taking a pause and thinking about it requires you to kind of give it some thought. And then it also allows you to maybe cool the emotions a little while you're thinking about it, until you become practiced at doing it. So what I like to do is step back, try to get into their shoes. And if there's a challenge for them as well, maybe it's taking a lot of extra time, it might be causing them some stress, I'll try to imagine what that could be and name it. Now, if I get it wrong, they'll probably correct it, but at least it will show that I'm trying to empathize with them and maybe understand what could be difficult about this for them too. So often by doing both of those, now I've kind of brought it full circle and I've explained it in terms of how it's affecting me and how it might be affecting them. And many years ago, I didn't used to do that. I would just kind of stop after speaking up about what it is and the feeling. And then I would kind of stop thinking, well, they should know what the impact is. The problem with that is we get into mind reading and we make a lot of assumptions. And for some reason, to say it out loud or to put it in writing in that way really brings it to life. So I prefer to use that method, and I hope that it will support you. Then there could be a 4th component. I'll toss this out. It occasionally works really well if you want to redirect somebody or offer an alternative, I call it. And to do that, according to communications research literature, if you phrase it in this way, so you're ready to get your quotes out? You ready for this? Phrase it this way: would you be willing to, and then dot, 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 finish the sentence. Would you be willing to? Why is that so significant? The research indicates that people are more likely to feel empowered to want to say yes, meaning it can engage their free will to the point where, keep in mind, they might say no because they do have a free will, but it is more receptive for people to have it phrased that way. Would you be willing? And I don't know exactly why. I have in the past said, would you please, could you please, and wondered, why is that so different? But for some reason, that willing word makes it feel as if it's our choice. And then we do have a choice. So all you're doing is kind of structuring it in a way to reduce some defensiveness, to spread it out over more people. And, you know, occasionally I'll get the question, well, Lori, if you use the it's versus the I am, or I feel, or I get, aren't you being passive aggressive? Are you not being direct enough? And you could make a case for that depending on the circumstances. Most of the time, I find that it is really helpful to, once again, just do some neutralizing of it so that we can talk about it more effectively. So you can try it, you can see what you think, but I found it to be really helpful. So for example, let's assume that we're back together, students are on campus, things are going well, we might be in the district building, we might be wherever we are in our working space, and chances are that somebody eventually, even though we're going to try to maintain, we're going to have these protocols, we're obviously going to be masked, we're going to be you know, trying to maintain that 6-foot distance whenever we can. Let's assume that perhaps somebody gets a little bit too close to us. It's very likely to happen, not by intention necessarily, but it's a subjective thing, and often our perception of space can vary amongst us. And there's a lot of cultural impacts and just comfort level where we might forget. So very likely, sooner or later, we're all going to be faced with that. And maybe we could use our 3-part sentence construction. So what if we said, it's concerning, or we could even say, it's unsafe. We could say that. It's concerning when we get too close because it puts us all at risk health-wise. Okay, that's an impact that's affecting both. So you didn't have to do 2 impacts, it was affecting both. And then if you feel like it's appropriate, you could even say, you know, I'm going to take a step back. Would you be willing to take a step back? Or just say, would you be willing to back up a little bit? That's a great way to handle it. The same thing could happen with our masks. Okay, maybe we took a drink from our water bottle, or we had a bite of our snack and then we got distracted and we forgot to pull it back up, or maybe it's down below our nose, not so effective. So we do need to prepare to have these conversations. And so that's where I like the, would you be willing to pull your mask back up, or your mask is slipped down, would you be willing to pull it back up? It's a great way to ask somebody and to acknowledge, to say, you know, it's not healthy, it's not safe when we don't have our masks up over our nose. Some people would just say, please put your mask up over your nose. That works too. So you kind of have to use your style, your personality, but notice that's a courteous way of asking as well, please. And so just a couple thoughts there. So what I also want to talk about here is doing some really good active listening. And so before we kind of move forward into that piece, let's touch upon this, allowing the moment of silence. And then I want to lead you through kind of a process on the next slide that will address this open-ended questions and avoiding the why questions. So when you're doing the listening component, so you're on the receiving end, if you can add in a couple extra seconds, maybe 2 to 3 seconds of silence, often a person has more to say. Think about it right now. Who do you know who is just the best listener in the world? If you want to put that in the chat, I could share that too, or just let me know. Maybe it's somebody in your colleague group, maybe it's somebody in your neighborhood, it could be someone in your own household. They're really good at listening. I am willing to bet that one of the techniques, maybe they don't think of it as a technique, maybe they just do it, is they're giving you a couple extra seconds of silence when you finish speaking. And on the receiving end, what that feels like is, oh my goodness, this person has time for me. They're patient. They're wanting me to say more. They're interested. So if you can do that, it can truly open up the communication. Now, if you have somebody who's super quiet or they just don't use a lot of words, let's face it, we're all on a spectrum of how verbal we are when we express. Some people don't say a lot. That's okay. If you want to encourage them to say more, another technique in addition to the silence is to take perhaps the last 1 to 2 to 3 words that they've said and simply be a mirror, repeat it back verbatim, but with an upward inflection in your voice as if you're asking a question. So if your colleague is seeming to be upset and you ask, is everything okay? Which is a really good question, hopefully well received, implying that I'm sensing something is not okay with you, and I'm asking, and I'm giving you time and space to share that. So let's say they come back and they say, just so stressed out, and that's all you have. Then it's kind of, you've used the 2 to 3 seconds and it's still silent. And you could then say, so stressed out or stressed out, and kind of like with an inquisitive tone, like I care and I'd love to hear more. So part of it will be your voice tone and the words. So then follow that by more silence and see if they may have more to say. And you can repeat that process repeatedly with somebody who tends to use very few words. They tend to be more perhaps introverted or quiet. Now, I wouldn't use that technique with somebody who's really direct, really assertive, super expressive. I would maybe do it once, but I think if you do it a second time, they're going to get irritated and say, I just said that. Like, why are you repeating me? So you can see where it doesn't work with every single style. So once you've done that, then let's talk about this next slide and begin kind of walking through a process. So there is, yeah, I'm sorry, my chat is still frozen up. So I'm going to, someone's echoing that, yeah, they're the person who doesn't like the repeating back of what they've just said. Yes. So you have to know who you're talking to and what's going on. So, all right, gosh, there's so many good things coming into the chat. I'm going to have to go back to circle to that. Yeah, so another important comment coming in is that we all have that neurodiversity. We all have different ways of perceiving, of communicating, and it's important, again, to get to know people individually and try to adapt our style and also maybe share what we prefer. And that's a great way to build a bridge of communication, and so that we can kind of meet each other and work through issues. So let's talk about this concept. So with the active listening, I do have a process that I use, and it's something that I've learned from an author by the name of Chris Voss, and I cannot type it in the chat. I apologize. So I can spell the last name for you if you're interested. And it comes from a book that he wrote called Never Split the Difference. Never split the difference. I'll try to repeat that again in a few minutes in case you missed it. Chris Voss, last name Voss, first name Chris. Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference. And his book is all about tactical empathy. And Chris has a former background as an FBI hostage negotiator in the 1980s and 90s. He's now a consultant. And so much of what he shares in the book is absolutely amazing for resolving conflict and collaborating. And it's under the genre, if you will, of negotiating. And negotiating often has a negative connotation for some reason in many circles. And I have to say, even for myself, I kind of shy away from that term because of some negative impressions that I have about negotiating. So the backstory to how I found this book is that my husband works in manufacturing. He negotiates a lot, and he got the book. And while he was reading it, he was highlighting it. He was very excitedly telling me about, oh, and then you can do this and that. And I thought, wait a minute, this sounds like what I do in my profession. How could this be about negotiating? Well, here's the reality. Anytime we're solving problems and working through conflict and collaborating on anything, do you know what we're doing? We're negotiating. So when I got my hands on this book, I became involved in really understanding the process. So in addition to using those seconds of silence, as we mentioned before, another thing we can do is channel our late night FM DJ voice. So we want to think about modulating our voice tone, bringing it down a little bit when we are working through an issue, talking a little bit softer, maybe a tiny bit slower, and that will often help the other person to start mirroring our style to keep the interaction a little calmer. So if you can practice that, and it's hard to do because often the other person, if they're getting heightened in their emotions, they might start talking louder and faster and higher pitch. And we then might be more likely to match them. That, as human beings, we mirror each other so much, if you've ever noticed it. So now you want to kind of counterbalance that by using your quieter voice. I call it the late night FM DJ voice. So if you can do that, it's a great technique. Then Chris recommends that when we are listening to somebody, we want to actually help them label emotions. So what that means is when they've said something, instead of moving into those open-ended questions, well, what if we try this? Well, how might we fix that? Instead of going there, which it's just great. I'm a problem solver too. I love to help people. And generally I find myself jumping into those questions. That's okay, but that will come a little bit later. So what I'm asking you to do, and what Chris recommends in his book, is slowing it down. So you're going to stay with it for just a minute. Now, this doesn't take a ton of extra time. I know you might be concerned like, uh-oh, she does not know how busy we are. We have no time for this. I would argue that we don't have time not to do this. Here's why. When you can help label an emotion, you're going to say something like either so they're going to share something. You're going to say, it sounds like, it looks like, or it seems like, and then you insert a feeling or experience word. It sounds like that's been pretty challenging. It looks like that's really confusing. It seems like that's pretty frustrating. Notice that you're not agreeing with it. You're not accepting it. You're not changing it. What you're doing is coming alongside of them with empathy, and you are validating their emotions. You're helping them by them hopefully feeling heard and understood. You might have to do it a few times. When they finally say, yeah, that's right, or yeah, that's it, yeah, then you'll know you've accomplished that. Now, what that does, according to brain research, MRI research out of UCLA, is it creates a mirroring in the brain. And it also, they can see on the brain waves that people shift from the emotional part of the brain back to the frontotemporal part of the brain where thinking and logical thought occurs, the problem solving, the coping skills, the strategizing. So until it's been accomplished that somebody feels heard and understood, it's really difficult for any of us to move forward into possibility. Does that make sense? So finally, once you've done that and you've created that neural resonance, think neurons in the brain, what it does is it disrupts the raw intensity of the emotion and helps a person move back to thinking. So then what we want to do is begin opening up to those open-ended questions, the how, the what, the where, the when questions. That's where I avoid the why questions. So what about this works for you? Or how might we resolve this? What is the biggest challenge you're facing? Or what about this doesn't work for you? How might it work? You know, perhaps you propose something to a colleague and to a student or to somebody and they say, well, that'll never work. Our question could be, well, how might it work? Once we've set the foundation of a person feeling heard and understood, then you can see where this makes sense. How can we solve this problem? What's the objective here? What about this is important to you? These are all open-ended questions. So I like to do a lot of how or what questions. That really helps. If you ask a why question, again, it might trigger some defensiveness. So that's where I tend to avoid that. So I hope that helps to get you thinking about a very systemic, easy strategy that can be used. And again, the name of the book is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And You know, Chris has an ultimate question that he asks when he feels that he has nowhere to turn. So an example that he gives in the book is being in a hostage negotiation session where there was a ransom demand made for a family member, and the family was unable to pay it. It was very exorbitant. So Chris went back to the hostage takers and said, how are we supposed to do that? How, and you could use that. You could use, how am I supposed to do that? What happens with that is it opens up to the other party helping us to solve problems. What we're doing is we're asking for their help. And asking for help is really powerful. So if you can do that through those open-ended questions, they're called calibrated questions, then you can begin building the bridge toward the solution. So I hope that helps a little bit to give you some ideas, and maybe you'll grab the book. So nonverbal communication is also key. And if we're not together, we may only have the voice tone. If we're on a phone call, then we have a 38% chance out of the full 100% to get an accurate communication. And yet that's a lot, isn't it? In fact, if you know somebody well, you might be able to hear within a first 2 or 3 words what their mood could be. The better you know them, the more you can hear those subtle nuances. And then you could ask, is everything okay? Is something wrong? And you could begin listening and doing those strategies. Also, eye contact is important. And if we're on a virtual platform, if we're not looking at our camera, we don't look like we're looking at the other person. But we know that eye contact is also culturally specific, meaning that if we're talking to somebody who's our leader, we might subvert our eyes and look down out of respect. So let's not jump to conclusions and assume that, well, if somebody's not looking me in the eye, maybe in person or in their camera, that they're not paying attention. Let's not make that leap. Or that they're hiding something. Believe it or not, I've heard people say, well, if they won't look me in the eye, they're being dishonest. Not necessarily true. So we just want to heighten our awareness. And if you are in person and you want to work on your eye contact, let's say you tend to be, it's just you're more sensitive to that and it's harder for you. Maybe it's not comfortable, or you're a little more shy, or it's just too intense. You know, windows of the soul are considered to be the eyes. So many people have sensitivity around that. And again, it could be part of our neurodiversity. So what you can do to practice it, if you want to work on it, is you can, because of our social distance, and now it's even greater social distance, you can look between the eyes, kind of up between the eyebrows, or you can look at the bridge of the nose. And the goal is to not stay there forever and just, you know, look at a person between the eyes or the nose bridge, but to eventually kind of practice by glancing up or down into the eyes and then looking back to the bridge or looking above. So it's a way of kind of helping ourselves get accustomed to looking at people in the eyes. So I hope that that helps a little bit. Certainly our body language and posture is huge. That's 55% of our communication. And so if we're talking to somebody and we ask them, you know, okay, so are you okay with this idea or the solution? And they cross their arms and they cross their eyes and roll them and they, yeah, that's fine. I'm okay with that. Well, the body language and the voice tone is kind of screaming, no, I'm not okay with this. So we want to pay attention to that, because we really can't override our body language so much of the time. It's really hard to cover it, and that's usually what we're feeling is what we're demonstrating. So anyway, this is a very long topic, and yeah, so what I wanted to also do, and we got some great comments coming into the chat, is let's talk about this this concept of, you know, respecting each other with the privacy. And it could come up that we are in conflict with somebody. It might have to do with the fact that we're concerned about our health and safety, and given that everybody's vaccination status is considered confidential and private, we may end up seeing things differently and having different opinions, and we may have different beliefs around that. So we're not here to get into all of that, but we're here to talk about how to engage respectfully. So a few kind of summarizing comments, and we're going to open up for a Q&A, and I want to circle back to the wonderful chat comments that have come in. Make sure that we're taking a little bit of time to do some deep breathing, to get our emotions back to a place where we can think clearly. And we might need to talk to somebody ourselves to help us get to that point. We might need to sleep on it, to wait a little bit. But generally speaking, conflict tends to fester if we don't talk about it sooner than later. So there's kind of a balance there between taking enough time for everybody to kind of get back to the thinking part of the brain versus the emotional part. And I can tell you, it can take up to about 20 minutes minimally for those of us who get extremely heightened. Okay, so that can be longer than we expect. We may not be able to realistically resolve something in 2 minutes. We might need to call a little bit of a break and take some time to come back together a little bit later. So that's really important. And by the way, you see calm down here. Don't tell somebody to calm down, because that doesn't work. But calm down yourself. I calm down myself. Put ourselves in the other person's shoes. If we can try to see it from their perspective, we can even talk to them and anchor their emotions by saying, I'm sure it seems like I'm being overreactive. I'm sure it seems like I'm asking you to pull up your mask again. We can kind of start the conversation. They may already be thinking it and feeling it, and that helps to anchor the emotion and to get it right out on the table so we can talk about it. Choose a private space free from interruption. Maybe consider adding a third party, an appropriate third party. Don't just, if you're in the building, as we start getting back together more and more, don't just grab your favorite coworker out of the hallway and say, come here, I need to pull you in on this. That may not be the appropriate person. Look to your human resource professional or your leader, somebody who is maybe even a neutral party, like a mediator. That's a possibility too, if you do need to work through conflict. Focus on the issues, not the personalities. Listen fully to the other person's point of view and try those techniques. It sounds like, it looks like, it seems like. That's a great way to have the conversation. So brainstorm solutions. What might we do? I like to use the word might because it opens up more infinite possibilities. If you say, how could we or how should we? Subconsciously, sometimes that indicates that I might be looking for a certain answer. But if I say, how might we do? It actually opens me up to be more curious. So I've tried to incorporate that into my language. It might feel awkward at first because we may not talk that way generally, but you can try that and practice it and see how it goes. And then attempt to reach a consensus and agree to follow up. That's the most important piece that is often dropped off, and you may need to follow up in writing. You may need to get back together. Let's set a time. Let's go to our calendars and check in to see how it's going. Maybe we'll change it again. So I like to have a plan going forward, not just assuming it's a one and done conversation. So these are the potential outcomes. And if you do have concerns and you feel like somebody isn't following protocols, or you're feeling uncomfortable for some reason, it might be a good idea to talk to somebody, even professionally, or go to somebody within your leadership team, perhaps your human resources professional, and talk it through with them first and figure out how to just construct a conversation and how to carry that out. So with the employee assistance program options, you can talk confidentially to a workplace specialist. So I just want to remind you of that while we're getting ready to pause and open up for any additional Q&A. And so here we go with the pause, and I'm going to kind of circle back to the chat as well.